Welcome to Daikaiju Network, where we have a very healthy obsession with kaiju. I am your co-host, Kent.
And I'm Jason.
And so here we are. We are continuing our trek through two tokusatsu shows. This one Jason has seen all the way through before. The other one we've only seen a couple episodes of, not including the ones we covered a couple weeks ago, but we are covering Kamen Rider as well. So here we are, our first batch of Spectreman episodes. Episodes 1 through 3 we're covering in this show. And before we proceed, Jason, is there any sort of tidying up we need to do here?
Yeah, as always, I'm just going to bring up the screen here. You can find us all of our social media networks and our website, and then there's audio players and stuff on our link tree link that you can see right there at the very top over at linktree/Daikaiju Network. And we're on the following video platforms: YouTube, Twitch, where we stream live every day, and all of our videos get transferred over to Rumble the following day there, and we're in our audio platforms listed below that we're on currently over at the Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and as well as TuneIn. And you can, if you see a red subscribe button down below, if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and as well as smash that like button, and as well as click on the notification bell icon to get any further updates in the future when we're live and everything. And you can go to our own website where we have both video and audio versions of our episodes, and as well whenever we do blogs, reviews, so on and so forth, our own website at daikaijunetwork.com.
So we're not on Facebook anymore?
Well, I've mentioned to you as far
there's
as
been so much going on in my own life here.
So,
your loss, Zucks.
But I've been thinking about when we go to when we do episode 150, and I'll have to talk with you about that after when we get done with the show. But when we do 150, probably go back to Facebook or something of the sort. But that's just kind of not definite yet. So.
Oh, well. Well, as mentioned, we are covering the first 3 episodes of Spectreman. The show debuted in 1971. A quick note on the version that we're going to be watching throughout this whole retrospective is that we're watching the English version of Spectreman that debuted in the States in 1978. And so, as a result, some of the names and plot points we are going to discuss may not be fully accurate or complete. As a result of that, anybody who has been watching Japanese tokusatsu long enough knows that when you get into English dubs and edits, things aren't always as pure as you would think they are. So, like, for example, here in the American edit, our main character who ends up turning into Spectreman, his name is George, but in the original Japanese, it's Joji. Karas, the ape assistant for Dr. Gory, is actually Ra in Japanese. So, we may end up using those names interchangeably as we go along this retrospective here. Just a quick little, I guess, brief history of Spectreman. Spectreman really came at a time, and I think is a response to the massive pollution problems Japan was facing at this time. As you enter the late 60s and you go on through a large chunk of the 70s, Tokyo was the most polluted city in the world, and Japan in general was having massive pollution issues. All of this was the result of the country having gone through reconstruction post-World War II. Economy was booming like crazy, but unfortunately, as a result of that, politicians and just the people in general did not have the foresight as far as the consequences of some of those actions. Hence, even the same year that Spectreman debuted in Japan, you had Godzilla versus Hedorah. And then in the United States in the early 70s as well, you would have pollution issues as well. And then you would have the EPA being ushered in, and then you would have Clean Water Act, and then Earth Day would end up coming in, and you would have all sorts of things really kind of across the globe being implemented in different countries to kind of clean up the air, clean up the water, clean up the food and all that. But it's kind of like Japan and the United States kind of were they were kind of mirror images of one another when it came to this sort of issue. So Spectreman, I didn't even realize this until I started watching it in preparation for the show, it is in many ways sort of what I am going to call not only to be partially funny, but to be kind of, true, is that it's a tree hugger type show in a way. It is about fighting Dr. Gory, who was this ape like humanoid from the planet.
It's like a mutant from was it Planet E?
Yeah,
and that he was assigned to the government to kind of help them do stuff, but then over time that they kind of found out that he was doing things that sort of threatened the government.
He wanted to use their advanced technology for evil purposes rather than good. They tried him and they sentenced him. I don't remember the exact sentence, but nevertheless, Karis, an army general, helped him to escape via UFO. After going through a magnetic field which blasted them across the solar system, they came upon the Earth. Dr. Gory really loved it, but was disgusted by the amount of pollution and has since decided he's going to use that pollution against humanity to destroy them so that he can colonize the Earth. And that's basically kind of what Spectreman is. It's kind of Dr. Gory continuing to use sludge, air pollution, all that stuff to create monsters to eradicate humanity. And therefore, Spectreman, an android from Nebula 71, brought down by the Overlord. I mean, to me, when you have a boss named the Overlord, I think of something more evil than good, but oh well.
Yeah.
And Spectreman obviously is sent to help young civilizations from destroying themselves and to prosper, which part of me, when I heard that, was like, well, if they're going to destroy themselves, let them do it. It's not your responsibility. Like, like what skin in the game do you guys at Nebula 71 have with the people of Earth? But that's basically the gist of the entire series. And so the individual stories are going to be a little bit different here. So, Jason, before we start diving into the individual episodes, is there anything you want to add or say about the series as a whole?
Yeah. And I know over the years, and I probably have mentioned on past episodes, that I have watched Spectreman before, and I've mentioned about it to Kent countless times and stuff. The last time I saw it, it was on a YouTube channel about 7 or 8 years ago, and I went through it, and I really enjoyed kind of the whole setup and story to it, and I liked Dr. Gory. I think he was probably one of the more unique characters I've seen in the whole tokusatsu realm and everything, and it's like that's probably one of the more memorable parts from the show is Dr. Gory himself. And I mentioned this to Kent via Facebook Messenger. I'm not sure if you saw it, that like it seemed when I watched the first few episodes, it felt a little bit different to me than when I watched it 7 or 8 years ago. It's like I don't quite remember the whole story building and everything, but I know we'll kind of sort of get to the nitty gritty of things when we get into the first few episodes here.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we just go ahead and dive into that? The first episode is titled "Gory Targets the Earth."
or Assignment Earth.
I was waiting for that. So, I mean, basically, this is our introductory episode. However, unlike some tokusatsu shows where you get sort of an origin for the hero, we really don't get that here. Spectreman is already on Earth, and Dr. Gory, it seems like to me, has been on the Earth not too terribly long, but maybe a brief bit of time. It seemed like that's what it seemed like to me as the episode was talking about it. And then it gives Dr. Gory's background story, which we talked about here a few minutes ago. And really, he ends up bringing about this kind of a plant squid-like creature called the Hedron. You kind of notice it's similar to Hedora, but then again, the Japanese words, obviously, the prefixes and all that are going to be very similar. And then towards the end of the episode, we get George or Joji turned into Spectreman, confronting this Hedron. And then it ends up being a to be continued because Dr. Gory has Kara shoot a ray at Spectreman. And I guess Spectreman, too. It must have been a quick shot because I missed it. But I guess Spectreman fired his Spectre ray at Hedron. And Hedron kind of was on fire a little bit as well. And then it was kind of a to be continued. And then George, earlier in the episode, as a humanoid, decides, hey, he's going to join this. I forget exactly the organization's name, but it's a pollution type organization that I guess
it's called the Pollution G Team or G Men. Now,
is it part of the government or is it a third party? I thought it was a third party that works with the government.
It's a government-run thing.
So yeah, I mean, basically, the whole point of them is to try to figure out ways to combat the pollution that Japan, and maybe even more specifically Tokyo, is undergoing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the one thing I wanted to point out is that I think this is one of the only tokusatsu shows that really pans out the whole backstory of a main antagonist to a specific show. And like when you compare it to a lot of tokusatsu shows or kaiju shows or movies or so on and so forth, you don't really get a whole lot of backstories to a lot of the main antagonists of the TV shows of this nature, and they really go in depth with Dr. Gory and everything, and they really, flesh out his story, and I really like how they do it with Spectreman. I think this is probably one of the most detailed backstories for a tokusatsu main antagonist.
Yeah, I will say I enjoy it. Like I said a moment ago, I do wish we got more on the background of Spectreman. Mm-hmm. I don't know if any of that is coming down the road, but
it seems like that they with a lot of the tokusatsu shows that you get background stories with the main protagonist, but not so much with the antagonist. Yeah. But this time around, it's sort of flipped.
Yeah, and I want more of Spectreman's story. Like, I don't need it to be a novel or anything. I just kind of want to know, where is this character coming from? Dr. Gory,
They sort of briefly tell it, but it doesn't take too much.
It's next to nothing.
Yeah.
You might as well just say nothing, because that's what we get out of it as well, as a big old nothing. It's like, okay, well, that does nothing for the character. But with regards to Dr. Gory and his background story, I do like that. But I will say it's very much of a trope, because I've seen numerous villain background stories like this before in other TV shows and movies, not just out of the tokusatsu, but I've seen it in Western movies and TV show storytelling. as well. And to me, yeah, even though it's a trope and you can kind of roll your eyes at it, for some people it may be like, oh my gosh, this isn't original or whatever, because we've seen something like this before where a villain whose civilization or country, whatever, is either scientifically and or technologically advanced, and instead of going along with the society that tends to want to use either such technological or scientific advancements for good, this individual wants to use it for evil. They end up being ostracized and exiled. And so there you go. And to me, it's like, okay, yes, this has been done numerous times throughout human storytelling history. But at the same time, to me, it's like, I'm okay with that. I mean, first and foremost, in today's world, there's very little, if any, originality anymore, because so many stories have been told over like nearly 10,000 years of modern human existence. So you're not going to get a whole lot of originality. And to me, it's okay, are the details good enough to where I am invested enough? And with regards to Dr. Gory, I am invested. I think I'm not fully invested. I'm not like overjoyed over it, but I am mildly impressed. I'm like, okay, they actually did something instead of something like, what was it, a guillotine from Johnny Sacco, where he just kind of showed up and it's like, okay, he's some evil alien that wants to conquer the earth. And typically with me, it's like, okay, sometimes I watch this stuff for general escapism, which is fine. And I don't need to know something other than black and white, good versus evil. I'm okay with that if I'm just wanting to sit there and just enjoy it for the sake of special effects and fights and explosions and all that stuff. But sometimes you want a little more meat on the bones. And Dr. Gory does provide that. Again, very tropish type of story, but it's good enough to where I'm like, okay, at least there's something to this character here that I at least understand why he's doing what he's doing. And may I ask, as being a tree hugger myself, there is a part of me that is very happy that Dr. Gory himself, even though he is a villain, he is also disgusted by the pollution on the earth. The only thing that makes him bad is not only does he want to eradicate humanity, he's going to use that same pollution to do so.
And then, too, with the whole climate and everything when it comes to these type of shows, during that time in the 70s when all the, I think back in the 70s or something, it was climate cooling at the time, and then 90s global warming and so on and so forth. It's like, I know kind of what you mentioned about tropisms with storytelling and all that stuff. The whole climate situation when it comes to these shows during that time was a lot of, part of that whole tropism sort of thing to kind of get the story, the characters and stuff moving forward with these type of things. And some of the parts with that whole climate story thing can be a little bit intriguing if you can try to make it intriguing and interesting in a way. But I know at times when you kind of do the same thing over and over again, it just kind of gets a little bit old in a way.
Well, and a lot of movies and shows very much are products of their time. Like, for example, after 9/11, you had very not only patriotic movies being produced here in the States, but a lot of stuff dealing in general with terrorism. And then like in the mid 2000s, there were a lot of movies. The Dark Knight actually was one of these movies. And in fact, you could argue perhaps the whole Nolan trilogy in some regards, but The Dark Knight definitely incorporated this, was sort of spying on its own citizens, hence the Patriot Act and some of the controversy that surrounded that when it was passed. And then, like you were talking about, I wouldn't say it was climate change, but rather pollution was the deal during the 70s here. And yeah, it very much was a product of its time in terms of that it was and still is a major problem. Things are getting better, thankfully, although still could be better. But it was one of those things, too, where You had Yoshimitsu Banno, the director of Godzilla vs. Hedorah, who was very concerned about this and was thinking, hey, through entertainment, through pop culture, we can kind of get the message out there for people to not only pay attention, but to try to do something about it themselves, to try to get politicians to do something about it, to just become proactive in solving this problem, because otherwise this is going to be the consequence if we don't do anything about it. And I think that's kind of what the people producing Spectreman were doing as well. It's like, this is a problem. We can use that for storytelling and entertainment purposes, of course, but at the same time, similar to Godzilla vs. Hedorah, we can sort of illustrate the terrors of pollution by making the metaphors as kaiju and terrorizing and destroying people. Like, for example, at least, because again, I'm not as familiar with this. This is my first time going through the series. The first 3 episodes we have here, you have kaiju that are spitting pollution, acidic-like substances
Poisonous
from
gases.
their mouths. Yeah, it's stuff that is the result of noxious fumes being spewed from car exhaust, factories, and just other ingredients that are found in sludge and all that other stuff. So in a way, yeah, it's entertainment, but it's also sending a message as well.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are, we're talking about, socio-political type messaging. But see, that's the thing. People, I would argue, because I've seen this happen so much in the last 2 or 3 years, not just within the Godzilla fandom, although I've seen it happening most within the Godzilla fandom on social media, but I've even seen it in general happening with discussions in regards to tokusatsu and saying either they aren't political or oh wow, must be a wedding going on over there. Did not know that. Sidebar. That there's no political message or messaging or whatever at all. And I, along with many other people, are going, do you even remotely pay attention to these movies? Because look at the United States. You have movies that have some type of messaging. It doesn't always have to be political, but there's always some type of messaging attached to them. And you take a look at Godzilla, the horrors of nuclear testing and the horrors of the aftermath of the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped in Japan. You have King Kong versus Godzilla, which is very comedic, but it also talks about commercialism. You have Mothra versus Godzilla, once again, kind of about commercialism with exploitation involved. You go through the gambit of the Godzilla saga in and of itself, and you're going to find messages in there. They may not always be political, but there's a message in there. Son of Godzilla, tampering with the weather or climate, there you go, and I mean, it's all over the place. And, Spectreman is no different.
But, kind of going back to talk about episode 1 here. As far as, we talked about Dr. Gory's backstory there. Let's talk about Hydron, in a way, kind of the appearance and everything. I know it's sort of the show was made around the time when Godzilla vs. Hedorah came into play, and I think it might have aired maybe before or a little after.
This was released in, if I remember, it was June. Mid-late June of 71.
You know what? Time for another round of research here.
We need some sound effects like research. Captain Jason doing research. Knowledge is power. Like something like that.
It says the original release was January 2nd of 1971.
So yes, this did come easily before Godzilla vs. Hedorah, because most Godzilla movies came out in December. I don't know if that was true with Hedorah.
Well, I think some of the movies from the Showa Godzilla era released around March. So
yeah, like Mothra vs. Godzilla was in March, and then Ghidorah was released like October, November, or something like that, because then he did Dagora in between.
Yeah, release date for Godzilla vs. Ghidorah was actually July 24th of 1971.
So I mean,
There.
still like more than half a year. Um, difference. Now, does that mean that Yoshi Mitsubano and Toho were like peekabooing on other studios as far as what they
Or
were
maybe
doing?
vice versa, and they try to beat them first.
Well, and they might because, again, we've talked about numerous times on this podcast about how production, at least in Toho, with Godzilla films, there was always such a very short production schedule, and TV production time in Japan during kind of the Showa era, regardless of studio, especially for science fiction fare,
Mhm.
was even shorter.
Mhm.
And like you had one season of like 50 some odd episodes and you only had like a few months to put it together. So good luck with that. Like,
Yeah.
like
But talking about Hedron, yeah, as far as the design of it just seems a bit random in a way. It doesn't really represent much of anything, although I think when we get to the second episode is more or less kind of this sea slug in a way, kind of this more mutated sea slug in a way that sort of fed on all the pollution and everything, and then had these, I don't know how you call it, dreadlock tentacles or something
tentacles of sorts. Yeah.
on the head and everything, and then sprayed all this corrosive mist in a way, breaking down all the buildings and such. As far as the design, uh, I'm kind of in the middle on it. I just don't quite know what it's supposed to represent. In a way, it's like when I said to myself, like, things seem to be a little bit different than what I remembered. It's like I don't quite remember Hydron in a way, kind of looking like this. In a way, kind of looking like this slug type of thing. It just seemed a bit weird to me.
Yeah, my initial thoughts on Hedron were, my gosh, this is lazy design. But then again, just like we talked about, remembering the very short period in which studios had to produce TV episodes. You know, you had to do what you had to do, even though it may not have been exactly what you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of was like, it's not that inspiring. It's pretty generic. I can, take it or leave it. I'm not that sold on it or in love with it. But then, yeah, like you were talking about the second episode in which, again, I forget, like a sea snail type of inspiration. I go, okay, like that makes more sense. Why didn't they show that in the first episode? Is beyond me. But it's one of those deals where you get an idea now as far as what they're playing with here as far as inspiration. I'm going, okay, that makes more sense. Still generic, but at least now I can kind of buy it a little bit more, because now I'm thinking to myself, it's not just some slapdash thrown together simple design that the producers of the show were kind of like, well, we don't have a whole lot of time, so let's just go ahead and just kind of throw some clay together and here we go. Like, we got a creature. It's there was some sort of inspiration behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then as far as the story for episode 1, I don't quite remember it being a little bit a slow builder in a way. It's a bit unusual when it comes to tokusatsu shows. It's like when it comes, with most of them, they just basically go into things almost right away. But with this one, with the whole backstory to Dr. Gory and everything, is kind of more or less a slow build. And to me, I think if you're a person that hasn't been well versed with kaiju or tokusatsu films or TV shows in that matter, I think this is, in my opinion, I think maybe sort of a good entry point to kind of get some people, kind of get them introduced into more of the tokusatsu realm of things, just to kind of get them, slow build things instead of just fast paced things. Because when you do like a lot of things fast paced and making things a bit confusing, I think that's a lot of things kind of getting people tuned out with a lot of things. With this one, where it kind of slow builds things, I think that's a good thing to kind of get them a little bit more invested in a way and kind of get them to watch the show more.
I don't think it's necessarily a slow build. I think it sort of depends on your tolerance for world building. Again, if you're one of those folks that is all for just general entertainment, explosions. And I'm talking about this genre in particular. You're talking about explosions. You're talking about just a lot of effects work. You're talking about people in monster creature costumes, doing it WWE style and all that. If that's your thing, then maybe some of this is, maybe slow to you. But for others who I consider myself in between, I can do both worlds where I can appreciate a good, in-depth, rich storytelling, and I can also take just pure entertainment schlock where you just turn off your brain and you take it for what it is. To me, this sort of sits not quite in the middle, but a little bit more into the schlock, but next to the middle, if that makes sense, if I were putting it on that spectrum. So, I mean, there's storytelling. It's still, again, I believe I even mentioned this when we were beginning to talk about this. It's tropish and it's not in depth, but it gives you just enough to where you understand what the deal is, and that's all I really need. But again, like with Johnny Sacco, like I sort of criticized that a little bit earlier, saying that Guillotine just kind of showed up and just wanted to conquer the earth. And I think some people out there listening to that, well, Johnny Sacco is a good show, how could you say that? I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm just saying that look, and I love Johnny Sacco. Let me make that clear. I do like the series, despite the fact that it has certain shortcomings, just like everything else. But if I'm looking for something a bit more to it, then Spectreman, at least for the moment, because I've only seen the first 3 episodes, has a bit more of that. But then again, I don't think there's anything wrong with what they did with Johnny Sacco and Guillotine either. Johnny Sacco is a series I've seen 3 times from beginning to end. I do find it entertaining. I find it even funny at times, like unintentionally funny at times, because I like that sort of thing. There are just times, and I said this over the last 2.5 years since we've been under this pandemic, I have wanted escapist entertainment. I want to ignore the outside world every once in a while and pretend it doesn't exist. And something like a Johnny Sacco, I think, is perfect entertainment for something like that. Spectreman, I think, is too. Spectreman, I think, though, is a bit heavier because it does deal with sort of a real world problem that not only really plagued the 70s, but still in a sense plagues us now as well. It's not as terrible, but because of the accumulation of pollutants over decades, if not 200 years, has caught up to us, and we're now seeing, some real serious problems as a result of that. So it's entertainment, but it's still heavy in a sense as well.
Mm-hmm. So is there really anything else you wanted to kind of touch upon for episode 1, or should we just kind of...
I just have to say, as far as costumes, I still find it funny, and this is, I think, the charm of not just tokusatsu, but more specifically tokusatsu shows in which the actors playing Dr. Gory and Karas are supposed to be apes, but when you look at Dr. Gory, the ends of his coat sleeves to where his white gloves are, pure human skin. No sense of gorilla, ape, primate type of, fleshing there. It's all human skin. So I find that funny.
I do like the appearance of both Dr. Gory and Karas in a way. And with Dr. Gory, he's just kind of that slick, more intelligent type
I like
of
that, yeah.
person in a way. And I think a lot of the antagonists that we've seen other tokusatsu shows, I think he's probably one of the best, if not the best, in my opinion, out of the tokusatsu antagonists in a way. And then as far as the suit for Spectreman, I do like kind of the whole gold and then brown kind of color palette to the design. I like the helmet and everything. It really suits Spectreman in a way. Although you would think, with the names Spectreman, with him doing the Spectre Ray with the rainbow and everything, you think it'd be a little bit more rainbow appearance in a way, but that really wouldn't work out the best in a way. So I think kind of that gold and brown color palette, I think, suits him best.
Yeah, I wrote these notes down after watching episode 3, but I might as well just say it now. In that, I like the actor doing Dr. Gory. The actor doing Dr. Gory is absolutely
and the dubber.
What?
And the dubber.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give more credit to the actor simply because the actor is very expressive. The masks are ever so slightly expressive, not quite though, but the actor does a lot of body language that is very reminiscent of what Yoshio Tsuchiya did with the Mysterians leader, and even more so with the Zeon leader of Planet X from the Monster Zero movie. And I see a lot of resemblances to Yoshio Tsuchiya's acting from those two movies in this actor's performance. And I love that an awful lot. And I must say too, and I was going to say this earlier and I forgot because we got caught up on some other side tangents. Obviously, Dr. Gory and his race and all that were very much inspired by the Planet of the Apes movies that at the time of this show's original release in Japan, those movies were like a year and a half old at that point. The first movie was released in 1968. And so definitely, and those movies were very, very popular for quite a while. And so hence again, like in 1974 with Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, you got Planet of the Apes, imitators there too. So yeah, it's very apparent that if you know a little bit of your cinema history, as far as at least in a general sense, the years of when certain films were released, and you see certain resemblances, you know what is happening. So yeah, but I mean, I'm ready for final thoughts and a grade.
Yeah, why don't you go right ahead?
Alrighty, here, pull up my document here. Spectreman is a show that is a response to Japan's awful pollution problems during the late 60s and into the 70s. What I like about this series already is that even the villain is appalled by the pollution of the planet and uses that pollution to create kaiju to eradicate humanity so he and Karas can colonize this new world. Being a fan of the original Planet of the Apes movies, I do find it amusing and fun that it's obvious those movies inspired Gory, Karas, and their race for the show. Like most shows aimed at a younger audience during the period, there are moments of comedy that are a bit too grown-inducing for adults, but much of the substance is still entertaining and engaging enough to keep adults content as well. I would have loved to know more about Spectreman itself, and think it's a bit odd that his overlord is willing to kill him if a secret identity is ever discovered. It makes their race villain-esque as well. Gory's story is similar to what we've seen in a number of movies and shows from Japan and the West, in that he wishes to use new technological and or scientific advancements for evil rather than good, and is banished as a result. It's rote, but I still think it's an effective storytelling method if the character story is told well enough. Here, Gory's story is fairly simple, but more intriguing given the fact that he too is disgusted by the pollution rather than embracing it, as I believe most Western writers would have written his character. For a first episode, I am brought into the story and do want to see more. I am intrigued and excited as to where we can go from here, and I give it an A.
Nice. Yeah, I couldn't quite hear as much because it seems like whenever you do your final thoughts or something, your internet kind of breaks up a little
weird.
bit, and your audio kind of gets
Maybe
a
if
bit
I go
choppy.
slower.
I don't know, a bit suspicious.
One time.
But now it sounds a lot clearer. So yeah, it's a bit sus.
Bit sus.
Why it does that. But yeah, as far as episode 1, like I mentioned, it well, and like with the first few episodes, it's kind of a slow building, but I think that's a bit of a good thing in a way, kind of to learn a little bit about the backstories of certain things, the villain, some of the characters, so on and so forth. And it doesn't have to be everything going all at once or battles all at once in one episode. And with episode 1, it's not a whole lot of going on, just more or less backstory and kind of building things up to get the whole show moving forward. And I really do kind of enjoy it, especially with the backstory of Dr. Gory in a way. With all the tokusatsu shows that I mentioned before, that I think this is probably the most well-in-depth backstory for a main antagonist there. And again, I do like the whole character of Dr. Gory, how he looks, and along with Karas, and then as well as Spectreman in a way. Yeah, so I do look forward to moving forward with the show as we review this down the road. So with episode 1, I also give it an A.
All right. So moving on to episode 2, titled Destroy the Pollution Monster Hedron.
Or The Horror of Hedron.
All right, so we get a continuation of what happened at the end of the first episode, where it was a to be continued. So this is kind of where I started noticing with this episode and the last one, and I think it's even worse in episode 3. There are some interesting jump cuts and weird edits, and I'm not quite sure to what extent the U.S. Distributor had in making such cuts, and how much the original Japanese studio had in making some of those cuts. It becomes very jarring, and like I said, I think episode 3 is far worse than 2. But I will say this. I was kind of taken aback, and this is maybe the one thing I will remember most about Spectreman, even long after we're done with this series, is the absolute bombastic violence that Karas does near the beginning of this episode, where he's taking people's arms and ripping them behind them, and he jumps on a man's head that ends up pushing this man's head into his body. And the fact too that Karas, and I think this is going to be an ongoing gag, because it definitely happens in episode 3, where he's trying to blend in with human society, but he never covers his face. And I'm just like, this show knows exactly what it is. It's so ridiculous that on the one hand I love it, but at the same time I'm laughing kind of at it as well. So the whole trying to blend in deal, and then Karas's carnage. I'm just like, look, I mean, we've said this before. We're always kind of surprised at the level of violence in kids' movies and shows in Japan. But at the same time, it still surprises you, because it's like, holy shit, he jumped on that guy's head, and that guy's head is smashed into his actual chest cavity. Like, it's just... It's just so.
See, I told you for many years that I think that you're gonna like this entire show.
I mean, I'm not joking. When I first saw that part where he jumps in the air and steps on that guy's head, I out loud said, "Holy shit." Like, I didn't realize they were good. I thought it was bad enough he took the first guy's arms and like ripped him all the way back. And then I audibly said, "Holy shit," when he stepped on that guy's head.
Yeah, and yeah, I think from what I can remember, it's going to be sort of an ongoing thing when Dr. Gory orders Karas to go down to Earth to do certain things, and a lot of times he'll wear that whole pea coat and hat sort of thing that you saw.
It's hilarious.
And I think maybe just one part of episode 2, but mainly in episode 3, you'll kind of see him a little bit more wearing that whole pea coat and hat sort of thing with the sunglasses.
It's so dumb, but at the same time, they know what they're doing, and they're kind of poking fun at themselves as well. I think it's great.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, when it comes to episode 2, you get to see more of what Hedron is sort of representing in a way, kind of like what you mentioned about earlier in the episode here, that and I too, that Hedron is kind of more of the sea slug sort of thing. You see in one of the scenes in this episode where Dr. Gory opens up this window to see this whole kind of tank in a way, and see the sea slug being put into it and then being fed a lot of the pollution and everything, and then later on gets unleashed by Dr. Gory and then turns into Hedron there. And also another thing too, before all that, when you talked about Karas and stuff, jumping on this guy's head and everything. Well, after that whole thing, he finds Joji unconscious and then takes the Spectreman helmet and then takes it back to Dr. Gory to
Which I
inspect.
thought was weird, because if he changes back into a human, shouldn't the helmet just kind of automatically disappear as well?
Yeah, you kind of think that
is
in
weird.
A way.
And let me just say, one of my biggest gripes, in fact, the biggest gripe I have about this episode, is that it's meandering. It's meandering because what ends up happening is because Joji got burnt up pretty nice as a result of that ray from the last episode. The Overlord, gosh, what an awful name, is repairing his armor, and 2 or 3 times Joji is saying, "Look, I need to change. Can I change into Spectreman?" And he's like, denied. And there's sort of these slow moments where he's just kind of by himself, kind of humdrumming it, and really nothing's happening. Nothing of substance is happening. And this little kid is a momentarily member of this same organization. In fact, he doesn't come back, at least not in episode 3. And there's really nothing happening throughout a large chunk of the episode. And I must say, I'm a little concerned right now.
It's just more or less kind of the team kind of further doing some investigating around the whole Bay Area. It's just more or less kind of continuing from episode 2.
And the thing is that there really is not that much in the way of actual investigation. Like, there isn't much of like what you would see in the Shiro Honda movies, where they would take moments to have like a conference and actually talk about either something that they grabbed, like some of the rocks or whatever from Destroy All Monsters that had the transmitters inside of them, or talking like, we had some reconnaissance. This is what we saw. This is the direction of said kaiju or creature or whatever was going. Like, what's our plan of attack moving forward? Because they're moving in a southeasterly direction. And so what do we do here? There's none of that. There's really, they think there's something going on, but the way that they filmed it and the way that they portray it, really nothing is going on.
Well, and I know towards the end of episode 2 that they took some samples of the sludge from Hydron and all that, but that was basically after when Hydron was destroyed.
It's after the point, yes.
So it just, what you mentioned too with some of the editing of the episode stuff that was a bit jarring here and there. I think that's a bit part of it, where they probably should have added that more towards the middle or something, and then they kind of investigate, how it was made, blah blah blah. It just seemed like some of the ordering of some of the scenes and editing was kind of out of places in some areas.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, and again, to what extent the editing was done by the Japanese studio or the Western studio, I don't know. There's not a whole lot of information out there as to the extent of the changes the Western studio made as opposed to the Japanese one. It's tough to say, but nevertheless, going off of what I saw, it was kind of boring in a sense. You had this very exciting story being told in episode 1, where there really was not a dull moment. Even when they were telling a story, they were telling good stories. And here you have a large chunk of the episode where hardly anything's going on, and they think there's something going on, but the way it's filmed and shot, really nothing. And I'm sadly not impressed here. And was it this episode, or no, I think it's the next one where Rita gets kidnapped?
Yeah, it was the third episode.
Okay, well, I'll wait until we get to that one, but yeah, it just it's really not a whole lot going on. The way I look at things, just more or less just sort of investigating things. Kara's taking the helmet, which we don't really hear much about that once Dr. Gore inspects the helmet and everything. It's more for the audience.
And then you don't really hear like whatever he did with that helmet afterwards.
Really nothing.
And if I remember, I think you don't really hear much about it after that whole
It's an exposition piece to cue the audience in on a small bit of Spectreman's background.
Yeah. And then Dr. Gore unleashes Hedron, and then Joji transforms into Spectreman, defeats it, and then towards the end there too, that the child knows that Joji is a Spectreman, but then of course I think you don't really hear much from that kid after this episode, and that was kind of basically
the Overlord killed him.
Basically it afterwards. So yeah, you can make your own conspiracy theories on that.
The Overlord though should have killed Spectreman, because he told Spectreman in the first episode, if your identity is ever found out, we'll kill you.
Yeah,
that's what he said. So
that's a little bit of a plot hole there, but I'm
not surprised that occurred, though.
That's basically the gist of episode 2 there. So just some investigation in quotes there, and then some more background stuff, and then get Spectreman defeating the monster, and then that was basically it.
Yeah. Well, my final thoughts on episode 2 is not quite as entertaining as the first episode. I will say, however, one of the things I'll always remember the series for is the brief bit of carnage Karis did to a handful of people early in the episode, pulling people's arms all the way behind them, and even stomping their heads into their bodies is really brutal. When Dr. Gore gets upset at Karis later in the episode over Spectreman being alive, I thought to myself, felt like Gory better be careful considering what Kara showed he can do. Nevertheless, getting to see Hedron killed by Spectreman was fun, but most of the episode was slowly building up George's character and attempting to build suspense by having the Overlord repair his armor. It's a pretty decent episode, but fairly meandering without a whole lot going on otherwise. I gave it a B+.
Yeah, I would agree with you on this episode that it's a bit of a little bit more of a slower build, not too much going on in between from the beginning into the end, where it's kind of going down and then back up towards the end there. And it's not much going on here. So with episode 2, I would give the Horror of Hedron a B+ too.
All right, so on to episode 3, which is the final episode we are covering for this podcast episode, called Terror of the Blue Scum.
Or The Fury of Dr. Gory, Part 1.
So, as I stated when we were in our discussion on episode 2, this is episode 2 and episode 3, and even more so with 3, I thought some of the jump cuts and edits were very distracting here, and I thought that made episode 3 kind of chaotic in terms of trying to follow it, because in the one moment a person's inside a particular building, but within the next 3 to 5 seconds they're outside with another group of people without too much of a proper transition. This one was hard to follow, and in my opinion, I'm going to say it right now, has me worried about moving forward now with this series. I am getting mild flashbacks to Ultra 7 from earlier in the year, where I was built up with excitement, and now things just within these first 3 episodes we're discussing have kind of started to decline. I'm a little concerned moving forward now with this series. I think the 2 kaiju that they have in this episode are pretty cool. One we see more of than the other, the dragon-like creature. I found it very amusing, though, that it was stop motion maybe 2/3 of the time, and then sort of a hand puppet slash suit the other part of the time. And stop motion is very time consuming and expensive, but not only that, it's just something you really don't see much of in Japanese pop culture. I mean, you just don't. Typically, it's all suits or now computers. I found it strange that stop motion played such a big part, but again, I think the reason why it did is because Spectreman is fighting this creature human size, and I thought Spectreman was like Ultraman, that Spectreman could grow and fight larger opponents, but I guess that's not something it can actually do.
Yeah, he can actually do that. I mean, you can see it.
Then why didn't they do that here? And see, now I'm getting even more angry. I am. I mean, first and foremost, like I said, the jump cuts and weird edits made it hard to follow this episode in parts to begin with. And because of the substance of this episode being what it is, I wasn't too excited about it. I'm going to say it right now. The fight between Spectreman and the kaiju was not fun to watch. I actually was not entertained by that. Part of it was because I thought the stop motion was okay, but it didn't provide you much with excitement. If you want exciting stop motion sequences, go look back to movies like Ray Harryhausen's Jason and the Argonauts, or the 3 Sinbad movies, or what have you, to figure out how to build action pieces with stop motion. What they did here, it was more of about vamping on either side than anything else, with very little going on. And by the way, one of my favorite moments of this episode is kind of within the first 5 or so minutes, where Spectreman is talking to the Overlord, and he's got his hand up in the air on the roof, and Rita comes around the corner. Oh, you're playing Hitler. Like, it's just this quick
I knew you were probably going to bring that up.
And I'm like, whoa. Like, first and foremost, this was still a period of time post World War II where Japan was kind of like, look, we want to forget about that part of our history, because they did team up with Nazi Germany in a way. And I'm like, why would you go there? Like, it's just mind-boggling.
Well, and one of the things when it comes to Spectreman, and I know a lot of people have pointed out that when he does his whole transform, he'll either kind of do kind of the double hand thing, or at times do like kind of the actual whole Nazi.
I've noticed that too.
Thing in a way too.
Well, and another part that I thought was funny was maybe roughly midway through the episode, where he's talking to the Overlord. He's wanting to once again transform into Spectreman, and he's told that he's denied. And the Overlord's like, why don't you check on your friend? And then he's kind of like, oh yeah, good thinking. Thanks for the reminder. I'm like, you were just talking about Rita here like 10 seconds earlier, and you already forgot. And I can go with the show when it knows it's dumb, but when you start to actually be dumb, I'm having a problem. And this show, starting in episode 3, is starting to be dumb. And I am getting frustrated. I'm getting more frustrated now than I did with Ultra 7, because Ultra 7, I kind of kept thinking, okay, this is just a rut. It'll get better. But because I went through Ultra 7 and I know how that turned out, I am expecting something very similar here with Spectreman. And that's why I am getting a bit more peeved than I would have otherwise if we had covered this like at the beginning of the year, because I am assuming that going forward, this may not get better. It may even get worse. And like I was saying about episode 2, and at the top of discussing this episode, I'm beginning to get concerned now, because I was like, Jason told me this was great. Like, episode 1 was great. Episode 2, I mean, it's stepped down, but whatever. Oh my gosh, episode 3. I mean, other than the stupid Hitler joke, like, like there isn't much here. Even the fight actually is pretty dull, and I just.
Well, and then just to kind of touch upon your critique as far as the stop motion, I probably would sort of disagree with you on that front. I wouldn't really compare to more of the higher end stop motion films like Ray Harryhausen. To me, it's a little bit of a disingenuous sort of thing, because, you know, and like what you mentioned earlier, that they didn't delve a whole lot with stop motion. They did a lot of things in suits. So to me, it's just sort of try to, you know, kind of do a little bit of experimentation in a way, and they, you know, try to do their best. And then of course you're not going to have experts trying to do the whole sort of thing.
And I want to be clear, I don't think it's terrible. I just think it's not great, obviously. And again, because of short production times, you're not going to be able to spend gobs of hours each day like they would on those movies to create, you know, smoother animation and stuff. But I still am wondering, why in the world, you know, would you go this route? Because it is more time consuming than putting a suit together. But I don't know, maybe for whatever strange reason, it was cheaper this time to do the stop motion than rather building a full suit. I don't know, but I still would think, considering the amount of time it takes for stop motion, you would be better off building a suit. I don't know, but I think to me it just makes no sense.
Well, I think sort of in kind of the first parts of it, if I can remember, that they try to do a little bit of stop motion, but I think later on, I think they don't really do that anymore, and then hence why you kind of see, like in the intros and stuff, where you see him large and all that, where you have these large kaiju and everything. So I think that's sort of how they think that they try. I think originally they try to do the stop motion, but then I think they kind of realized it kind of got expensive in that regard, and that's why they kind of went with the whole suit route, and then kind of making Spectreman big and everything, and then fighting all these big kaiju.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's terrible, but to me, just from a production standpoint, in many respects, it seemed like an odd choice to go with. But I mean, more or less, you kind of know what I think about this episode. I'm not very fond of it, and I'm just. I'm getting kind of concerned moving forward now with this series because, like I said, it's gradually going down, in my opinion, as far as entertainment value and just even real substance value as well. Save me from this sinking ship, Jason. But like you were even saying, you don't remember certain things being a certain way. I'm starting to wonder, like, are we in for an Ultra 7 type of experience here?
But yeah, and then this is the episode 2 where Dr. Gore kind of more or less establishes his own main base in a way on Earth, instead of just being in a flying saucer like Guillotine in Johnny Sacco, where he's just in his spaceship most of the entire show there. And then I know you mentioned about Kara's capturing Rita a little bit ago. I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to mention about that.
Maybe, and I don't know if this is true or not, but part of me was like King Kong homage, maybe.
Or, yeah, maybe a little bit, but I don't know. Yeah, and then you got this blue ooze. I don't know if that was part of this one kaiju that was in this episode. I know he fires this blue mist away. I don't know if that was sort of related to the blue ooze that was sort of
we're never
had
really...
this self-consciousness on its own. But yeah, we don't really get a whole lot in that regard. But
yeah,
then I know
and that story point is never resolved.
Yeah, but then I know once Spectreman defeats this kaiju, and then towards the end there, when Kars kidnaps Rita there, gets chased down by Spectreman, and then you had Dr. Gory sending out Zeron, which was building Dr. Gory's main base there in the ocean. He sent them out, and then that was kind of when the episode ends right there, or to be continued right there. So kind of on the cliffhanger for that. So we'll kind of have to wait and see for next time.
Yeah. Well, my final thoughts on episode 3 is the last 2 episodes have seen some weird edits and jump cuts in them. To what extent the U.S. producers had a hand in this is unclear. Regardless, jumps and edits have been a bit jarring during these last 2 episodes. I have to say, too, the actor portraying Dr. Gory is an incredible actor, and you've already talked about this earlier. I'm going to jump through this. I talked about Spectreman like turning large. Cars, okay. However, I felt my interest beginning to wane with this episode. It's beginning to feel as if the series is meandering and perhaps unsure of how it wants to proceed in telling its stories. I became pretty bored during most of this episode, and that has me concerned moving forward. Too much time is spent on particular character moments that really don't add up to much of anything. And I must say, despite the neat combining of pseudomation with stop motion, I didn't care for the fight at the end of the episode. What began as something that got me really excited has now got me concerned that we're heading into a show that, while having good intentions, does not know how to effectively proceed. Sadly, as we progress through these first 3 episodes, I've become less enamored with the show. I'm really hoping it picks up again shortly, and I gave it a C-.
Wow. So for me with this one, I think I have a little bit of higher regard when it comes to this. Yeah, maybe some of the editing was a little bit jarring, but I was still more invested with this episode compared to Kent here on this one. I wish we had a little bit uh, more as far as what the Blue Ooze was doing. It just seemed like it was sort of the main thing, but then you had the kaiju then come in a ways, and then you kind of get a little bit more world building in this one here, kind of going along with episode 1 and 2. But I did sort of like how they try to do some stop motion with this one. Yeah, it's not perfect or great or anything in that regard, but I think it was kind of more or less trying to do their best and trying to do something a little bit more experimental in a way. And I think kind of in the long run that they sort of ditched the whole thing, and they kind of sort of thought, yeah, it's going to be a little bit expensive for how many episodes that we're going to be doing. So we'll just kind of do the whole giant monster growing and then having the humanoid size being grown big, kind of like Ultraman in a way. But yeah, and I'll say it again with Dr. Gore, I really like the character and everything. He's probably one of the better villains in the whole tokusatsu genre and everything. But with episode 3, The Fury of Dr. Gory Part 1, I would at least give it an A.
All right. Well, with that, we wrap up this episode of Daikaiju Network. Within 2 weeks, we're going to talk about the next 3 episodes in Kamen Rider. That'll be episodes 4 through 6.
Or with it being episode 150 the next time. I don't know if there is anything specific you want to dive into, or just sort of continue the back and forth.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, did you have something?
No, not really. I just sort of thought if there was anything in specific just to kind of sort of commemorate episode 150.
People listening to us and know us can maybe give us money, I guess. I mean, that's,
well, we don't have any,
I'm not going to do, I don't plan on
we don't have any kind of Patreon or whatever
it doesn't matter.
So.
They can get in touch with us. We got, the YouTube channel, Facebook, Twitter. I mean, there are all sorts of ways we can get in touch with people, and they can be like, hey, what's your address or whatever? Where can I send money?
Or have some kind of print-on-demand merchandise or anything. So, but
yeah.
But yeah, other than that, yeah, thanks for watching, and hoping you'll look forward to the next few episodes of Kamen Rider. And is there anything else you want to mention before I kind of do kind of the last remaining?
Anybody out there who's seen the show relatively recent, and I'm talking about Spectreman, can you please let me know if this indeed does get better? Because I do not want to go through another Ultra 7. I just don't. I two of those shows in 1 year, I can't do. So please let me know if you know.
And so just kind of a last reminder sort of thing before we close out here. If you see that red subscribe button down below, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to hit that and to subscribe to us, smash that like button, and as well as hit that notification bell icon so you can get any further updates when we go live onto YouTube. And if you see on the screen here, you can find us everywhere in one place on our Linktree page there. You can watch us live via Twitch. You can listen to a lot of the episodes on any of the audio platforms like Spotify, iHeartRadio, etc. Over at Linktree/Daikaiju Network. You can find us on these listed video platforms when we're live. They're on YouTube, Twitch, and then everything is archived into Rumble the following day. And you can find us on the audio platforms here Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and as well as TuneIn. And you can find both video and audio versions of our episodes at our own website. We'll do blogs here and there and all that over at daikaijunetwork.com.
And so with that, once again, thank you for listening or watching, and we will see